Officer Diane Reynolds loved the quiet streets of Oakwood Heights. The wealthy neighborhood with its manicured lawns and luxury cars gave her a sense of purpose. She wasn't just any cop. She was the shield that protected good people from the dangers lurking beyond their picket fences. At least that's what she told herself during her evening patrols. The late September air carried the first hint of autumn as Diane cruised down Maple Avenue in her patrol car. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, and most homes glowed with warm light from within. Her radio crackled occasionally with routine updates, but tonight was peaceful. The kind of night that made her job feel easy. Too easy, perhaps. Diane had been on the force for 8 years, and she prided herself on what she called her sixth sense. Her colleagues called it something else behind her back: profiling. She had a habit of stopping black men in Oakwood Heights, particularly those who didn't look like they belonged. Her supervisor had spoken to her about it twice, but Diane dismissed these conversations as political correctness gone mad. She was just being thorough, protecting the community. The fact that her stops rarely led to actual arrests was, in her mind, proof that her presence was deterring crime. As she turned onto Birchwood Drive, something caught her eye. A dark sedan was parked in front of a house that had been on the market for months. A man stood on the sidewalk looking at the property. He wore a tailored overcoat and carried what appeared to be a leather portfolio. Diane slowed her patrol car and watched. The man walked up the driveway, then moved to the side of the house, peering around as if checking the property boundaries. Bingo, Diane muttered to herself. Despite his expensive clothes, she immediately classified him as suspicious. She didn't consciously acknowledge it, but the fact that he was black had already triggered her alert system. In her mind, she was already constructing a narrative. He was casing the empty house, planning a break-in, maybe even setting up a base for dealing drugs in the neighborhood. Diane parked her car and stepped out, adjusting her utility belt. She didn't call for backup or report her position. This was routine for her. She approached quietly, one hand resting near her weapon. "Hey, you there?" she called out sharply when she was about 20 feet away. The man turned, surprised. Under the streetlight, Diane could see he was in his mid-40s with close-cropped salt-and-pepper hair and glasses. He smiled politely. "Good evening, officer," he said, his voice deep and measured. "Can I help you? What are you doing on this property?" Diane demanded, not returning the greeting. She moved closer, her stance wide and authoritative. "I'm just looking at my new home," the man replied, gesturing toward the house. "I closed on it yesterday." Diane's eyes narrowed. This was a common excuse, one she'd heard before from people who had no business being in Oakwood Heights. "Sure you did. I'm going to need to see some ID." The man's smile faded slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Of course. My name is Richard Taylor. I'm the new police commissioner for this district. I just moved from—" "I don't care who you claim to be," Diane interrupted. "ID now." Richard Taylor sighed, a familiar weariness crossing his features. He'd been here before, too many times to count. "My wallet is in my inside pocket. I'm going to reach for it now, okay?" Diane didn't respond, just watched him with suspicious eyes. As Richard slowly moved his hand toward his coat, his phone buzzed loudly in his outer pocket. Without thinking, he reached for it instead. "Hand where I can see it," Diane shouted, instantly on high alert. "Don't move." "It's just my phone," Richard explained calmly, freezing in place. "I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking. I'll show you my ID first," but Diane was already in motion. In her mind, the reaching movement had confirmed her suspicions. This was a threat, and she was trained to neutralize threats. She closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps and swung her baton, striking Richard on the shoulder. Richard gasped in pain and shock. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his calm demeanor finally breaking. "I'm reaching for my ID like you asked." "On the ground now," Diane ordered, adrenaline pumping through her veins. When Richard didn't immediately comply, confused by the escalation, she pushed him roughly against the side of the house. "I said on the ground." "This is completely unnecessary," Richard protested, but slowly lowered himself to his knees, then to the ground. "I am the new police commissioner. If you just let me show you my ID—" "Shut up!" Diane snapped, pulling his arms behind his back and cuffing him with practiced efficiency. Only when he was restrained did she reach into his coat pocket and pull out his wallet. The first thing she saw when she opened it was the gold badge. Police Commissioner Richard Taylor, exactly as he'd said. Next to it was his driver's license with the address of the very house they were standing beside. Diane felt the blood drain from her face. The world seemed to tilt sideways as the reality of what she'd done crashed down on her. She had just assaulted her new boss, the highest-ranking officer in the district, while he was looking at his own property. "Officer," Richard spoke from the ground, his voice remarkably controlled despite the circumstances, "I think we need to have a conversation about what just happened here. But first, I'd appreciate it if you'd remove these handcuffs." Diane's hands trembled as she unlocked the cuffs. Her mind raced through potential excuses, explanations, defenses. It was dark. He had made a sudden movement. She was just being cautious. But deep down she knew the truth. If Richard had been white, she wouldn't have approached him in the first place. As Richard slowly got to his feet, rubbing his wrists, Diane caught sight of her reflection in the window of the house. For the first time, she saw herself as others might see her, not as a protector, but as someone driven by fear and prejudice. "Your name and badge number?" "Officer," Richard requested quietly. "Officer Diane Reynolds. Badge number 8742, she responded automatically, her voice small. Richard straightened his coat and picked up his portfolio from where it had fallen. There would be bruising on his shoulder tomorrow, perhaps worse. "Officer Reynolds, report to my office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. We have a lot to discuss about proper police procedure, reasonable suspicion, and the use of force." "Yes, sir," Diane managed to say. Her career flashed before her eyes. 8 years of service, potentially over in less than 5 minutes of terrible judgment. "I suggest you call this in properly," Richard added, nodding toward her patrol car. "Document everything that happened here. Complete transparency." Diane nodded wordlessly. As Richard walked toward the front door of his new home, she remained rooted to the spot, the full weight of her actions beginning to sink in. The neighborhood she had claimed to protect now seemed to watch her with accusing eyes from behind every window. Back in her patrol car, Diane's hand hovered over the radio. How could she possibly report this? What would her fellow officers think? What would happen to her? But deeper questions began to surface too. Questions she had avoided for years. How many other innocent people had she harassed? How many times had she seen threat where there was none, simply because of the color of someone's skin? The radio crackled, startling her. "Unit 47, what's your status?" Diane took a deep breath and picked up the receiver. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need to report an incident." As she began to detail what had happened, Diane caught sight of Richard Taylor standing at his front window, watching her. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, and in that moment, Diane knew that tomorrow would be the beginning of a reckoning, not just for her career, but for everything she thought she knew about herself and the badge she wore. The night air felt colder now as reality settled around her shoulders like a heavy cloak. The quiet streets of Oakwood Heights no longer seemed peaceful. Instead, they echoed with the sound of her own prejudice, finally impossible to ignore. The news spread through the police department like wildfire. By the time Diane arrived at the station the next morning, the whispers stopped whenever she walked into a room. She kept her eyes forward, trying to ignore the stares that followed her down the hallway toward the commissioner's office. Her uniform felt too tight around her neck. She'd barely slept, replaying last night's incident over and over. Each time she tried to justify her actions, but the excuses rang hollow even to her own ears. The look on Richard Taylor's face when she'd struck him, surprise, then a deep, weary recognition, haunted her. "They're saying he's going to make an example of you," Officer Chen whispered as Diane passed the break room. Chen had been her friend, or at least Diane had thought so. Now there was a distance in her eyes. "Thanks for the support," Diane muttered, continuing down the hall. "Just saying what everyone's thinking," Chen called after her. "What were you thinking, Reynolds?" What had she been thinking? Diane couldn't even explain it to herself anymore. In the harsh light of day, her sixth sense seemed like exactly what her critics had always called it. Prejudice, plain and simple. The commissioner's secretary, an older woman with steel-gray hair, looked up as Diane approached. "Officer Reynolds," she said, her voice cool. "Commissioner Taylor is expecting you. Go right in." Diane knocked on the heavy wooden door, then entered when she heard Richard's deep voice calling, "Come in." The office was different from when the previous commissioner had occupied it. Already family photos lined the desk. Richard with a woman who must be his wife, 2 college-aged children in graduation caps, an elderly woman with Richard's same smile. Books filled the shelves and the window blinds were open, letting in the morning light. Richard sat behind the desk, his shoulder visibly stiff as he turned to face her. A bruise peeked out from his collar, evidence of her baton strike the night before. "Officer Reynolds," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Please, sit down." Diane sat ramrod straight, hands on her knees. "Sir, I want to apologize for—" Richard held up a hand. "Before you continue, I want to make something clear. This meeting isn't about apologies. It's about understanding exactly what happened last night and why." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Linda, could you send in Captain Morales, please?" Diane's heart sank. Captain Morales was head of internal affairs. This wasn't just a reprimand, this was an official investigation. A moment later, Captain Morales entered, a stern woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for thoroughness. She nodded to Diane without warmth and sat in the chair beside her, opening a folder. "I've reviewed your report from last night," Richard began, "as well as the footage from your body camera." He turned his computer monitor so Diane could see it. "I'd like to watch it together." Diane's stomach twisted as Richard pressed play. There she was, approaching Richard without identifying herself properly. Her voice harsh, suspicious from the start. The way she cut him off when he tried to explain. The quick escalation to violence when he reached for his phone. Watching it was worse than remembering it. In her memory, she could still cling to some justification. On video, there was none. Just a police officer attacking a man who had done nothing wrong. When the video ended, the office was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. "Officer Reynolds," Richard finally said, "your record shows 8 years on the force. 2 commendations for bravery. And also this." He slid a folder across the desk. 6 civilian complaints about racial profiling. 2 official warnings from your previous supervisors. Those complaints were investigated and dismissed, Diane said automatically, the defense rising to her lips before she could stop it. "Yes, they were," Richard agreed, "by a system designed to protect its own. That changes now." He leaned forward, wincing slightly at the movement. "Last night wasn't an isolated incident, was it? It's how you police. You see black faces and automatically assume criminal intent. That's not—" Diane began, then stopped. Wasn't it exactly what she'd done? "I was trained to look for suspicious behavior," she said instead. "And what was suspicious about a well-dressed man looking at a house in the evening?" Captain Morales asked. "Other than his race?" Diane had no answer. Richard sighed, rubbing his temple. "The community is already aware of what happened. My neighbor across the street recorded part of the incident on his phone. It's making the rounds on social media." Diane felt the blood drain from her face. "Social media?" "Yes, people are calling for your badge," Captain Morales said bluntly. "And frankly, there would be plenty of justification for termination." The word hit Diane like a physical blow. Termination. 8 years gone in one night of terrible judgment. What would she do? Who would she be without the badge? "However," Richard continued, "I don't believe firing you solves the deeper problem." Diane looked up, surprised. "The problem isn't just you, Officer Reynolds. It's a culture that has allowed these behaviors to go unchecked. It's training that emphasizes threat detection over community connection. It's a system that dismisses complaints from certain communities." Richard stood, moving to look out the window at the city below. "Firing you would make a statement, but it wouldn't create change." "What are you saying, sir?" Diane asked, hardly daring to hope. Richard turned back to face her. "I'm saying you have a choice. Option 1. We proceed with a full internal investigation. Based on the evidence, termination would likely be the outcome. Option 2, you accept a 6-week suspension without pay, mandatory retraining and reassignment." "Reassignment?" Diane asked. "To community outreach in the Oak Park district," Captain Morales supplied, "working directly with community leaders who have been critical of police practices." Oak Park, the predominantly black neighborhood that Diane had purposely avoided in her career. The thought made her uncomfortable, which was precisely why she knew it was the right assignment. "Additionally," Richard continued, "you'll participate in a restorative justice process with community members who have been affected by similar police actions." "You want me to sit down with people and—" "What, listen to them complain about cops?" Diane asked, her defensiveness flaring. Richard's gaze hardened. I want you to sit down with fellow human beings and hear how actions like yours have affected their lives. I want you to understand the damage that's been done. And yes, Officer Reynolds, I want you to listen." The room fell silent again. Diane looked down at her hands, noticing they were trembling slightly. Everything in her wanted to defend herself, to explain that she was just doing her job. But the evidence was right there on the video screen. "There was no defense. Why are you giving me this chance?" she finally asked, looking up at Richard. "After what I did to you?" Richard touched his bruised shoulder unconsciously. "Because 20 years ago an officer did to me exactly what you did last night. He didn't give me a chance to explain. He assumed I was a criminal because of how I looked. The difference was I didn't have the position or power to hold him accountable." He returned to his chair. "The system protected him just like it's protected you until now." He leaned forward, his eyes meeting Diane's directly. "I'm giving you this opportunity not just for your sake, but because I believe people can change when they're confronted with the truth. The question is, are you willing to face that truth, Officer Reynolds?" The weight of the question settled over Diane. She thought about her father, also a cop, who had taught her to trust her instincts. Had he also taught her his prejudices? She thought about all the stops she'd made over the years, the faces of black men who had looked at her with that same weary recognition she'd seen in Richard's eyes. "I need time to think," she said quietly. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide," Richard replied. "But understand this. If you choose to stay on the force, things will not go back to the way they were. I expect real change, not just going through the motions." Captain Morales stood. "I'll escort you out, Officer Reynolds." As Diane rose to leave, Richard added, "One more thing. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that last night, when you approached me, that was the 4th time this month I've been stopped by police in my own neighborhood. The 4th time, think about what that means." The words followed Diane all the way down the hallway, past the staring eyes of her colleagues and out into the parking lot where she finally let the tears come. In her car, she sat for a long time, looking at her reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman who looked back at her wasn't the hero she'd always imagined herself to be. But maybe, just maybe, she could become someone better than she had been. Diane spent the night driving aimlessly through the city she'd sworn to protect. She passed through neighborhoods she normally patrolled, then into areas she usually avoided. For the first time, she really looked at the people. Families closing up shops, teenagers hanging out on corners, elderly couples walking hand in hand. Had she ever seen them as individuals before, or just as potential problems to manage? By morning, she knew her decision. She couldn't walk away from the job that had defined her for 8 years. But maybe it was time to redefine what that job meant. The community center in Oak Park wasn't what Diane expected. The building was old but well-maintained, with a small garden out front where children played while their parents chatted on benches. A colorful mural covered one wall, showing diverse hands joined together against a backdrop of city landmarks. Diane parked her personal car, no patrol vehicle during her suspension, and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. 2 weeks had passed since her meeting with Commissioner Taylor. She had accepted his offer: suspension, retraining, and community service. Today was her first day reporting to her new assignment. "You must be Officer Reynolds," a voice called as she approached the entrance. A tall woman with close-cropped gray hair stood in the doorway, arms crossed. She wore jeans and a t-shirt with the center's logo. Nothing about her posture suggested she was happy to see Diane. "Yes, ma'am," Diane replied. "But it's just Diane while I'm suspended." The woman nodded curtly. "I'm Loretta Washington. I run this place." She held the door open, not exactly welcoming, but not turning Diane away either. "Commissioner Taylor called. Said you'd be helping out for the next month." Diane followed Loretta into the building. The walls were covered with community announcements, children's artwork, and photographs of neighborhood events. A classroom to the right was filled with older adults taking a computer class. To the left, a group of teens worked on what looked like a video project. "What exactly am I supposed to do here?" Diane asked, feeling out of place without her uniform and badge. Loretta stopped walking and turned to face her directly. "Commissioner Taylor told me what happened. He also told me about your record of stopping young black men in Oakwood Heights." Diane felt her face flush with shame. "I'm trying to be better," she said quietly. "Trying isn't enough," Loretta said firmly. "Not when people's lives and dignity are at stake." She softened slightly at Diane's expression. But it's a start, come on. I'll show you what we're dealing with here. Loretta led Diane to a small conference room where about a dozen teenagers sat around a table. They fell silent when Diane entered. Everyone, this is Diane, Loretta announced. She's a police officer, but she's here to listen today, not to police anyone. Diane, these young people are part of our Youth Leadership Council. They're working on a presentation about community police relations. The teens regarded Diane with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. One boy, about 16, spoke up. Are you here to spy on us? Andre, Loretta warned. It's a fair question, Diane said. No, I'm not here to spy. I'm here because I messed up. I hurt someone because I made assumptions about him based on his race. I'm trying to understand how to do better. Her honesty seemed to surprise the teens. A girl with brightly colored braids leaned forward. You actually admitted you were wrong? I've never heard a cop do that before. Lisa, Loretta cautioned, but there was a hint of approval in her voice. Diane took a seat at the edge of the group. I've been a cop for 8 years, she said. And until 2 weeks ago, I probably wouldn't have admitted I was wrong either. What changed? Andre asked, his arms still crossed defensively. Diane thought about it. I saw myself through someone else's eyes, and I didn't like what I saw. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Lisa spoke again. We're gathering stories about interactions with police. Would you want to hear some of them? Diane's instinct was to say no, to defend her profession, to explain that a few bad experiences didn't represent all officers. But that wasn't why she was here. Yes, she said instead. I'd like to hear. For the next hour, Diane listened as the teenagers shared their experiences. Andre described being followed around stores by security guards since he was 12. Lisa talked about her brother being handcuffed on the ground because he matched a description. Others shared stories of being pulled over, questioned or treated with suspicion for simply existing in certain spaces. Each story hit Diane like a physical blow. These weren't hardened criminals. They were kids, bright, articulate kids with dreams and fears just like anyone else. And the fear that ran through many of their stories was a fear of the very people sworn to protect them. My dad gave me the talk when I was 10, a quiet boy named Devin said, about how to act if I get stopped by police. Keep your hands visible. Don't make sudden movements. Say yes, sir, and no, sir. Don't argue even if they're wrong. My parents gave me the same talk, Diane admitted, surprising herself. The teens looked at her in shock. I'm mixed race. My mom is black, my dad is white and a cop. He taught me how to survive police encounters, then went out and became part of the same system. And you followed him, Lisa observed. I did, Diane acknowledged. I thought I could be different, better, but instead, she trailed off. Instead, you became exactly what he warned you about. Andre finished for her. The truth of it stunned Diane into silence. After the session ended, Diane helped clean up the conference room. Her mind was spinning with everything she'd heard. Loretta came in as she was stacking chairs. You did good today, Loretta said. Listening isn't easy, especially when the stories are hard to hear. Those kids have been through a lot, Diane said. Yes, Loretta agreed. And they're the lucky ones. They have support, education, people looking out for them. Many don't. Diane set down the chair she was holding. Can I ask you something? Why did you agree to let me come here? After what I did? Loretta considered the question. Because Richard Taylor is a good man who believes in second chances. And because sometimes, the people who need to learn the most are the ones least likely to seek out the lesson on their own. I don't know if I can change, Diane admitted. 8 years of thinking a certain way. It doesn't just disappear overnight. No, it doesn't, Loretta agreed. Change is a process, not an event. But recognizing the need for change, that's the first step. She handed Diane a flyer. Tomorrow night. Community Forum on Policing. The commissioner will be there, along with other officers and community members. It might be good for you to come. Diane nodded, taking the flyer. I'll be there. As she walked to her car, Diane's phone buzzed with a text from her father. How's the punishment detail going? These sensitivity assignments are all for show. Just get through it and you'll be back on real police work soon. Diane stared at the message, feeling a strange disconnect. Her father's words, once comforting in their certainty, now felt hollow. For the first time, She wondered if her father's definition of real police work was part of the problem. She started to type a defensive response, something that would reassure him she was still the daughter he raised. Instead, she put the phone away without answering. She wasn't sure who that daughter was anymore. That evening, Diane sat at her kitchen table with a stack of papers Commissioner Taylor had given her. Department statistics on stops, searches and arrests broken down by race and neighborhood. The numbers told a story she could no longer ignore. Officers like her were stopping black drivers at 3 times the rate of white drivers. Uses of force were disproportionately directed at people of color. The very patterns she had dismissed as necessary policing were laid bare in black and white. As she read, Diane thought about the teenagers from the center. About Richard Taylor being stopped 4 times in his own neighborhood. About her own mother's warnings when she was young. The picture these fragments formed was becoming impossible to deny. Her phone buzzed again. Her father calling this time. Diane took a deep breath and answered. "Dad, we need to talk," she said. "About the job. About what it really means to protect and serve." The community center's main hall was packed wall to wall with people by the time Diane arrived. She slipped in through the side door, hoping to avoid attention. Without her uniform, she was just another face in the crowd, except that some people definitely recognized her. Whispers followed her as she found a seat in the back row. A long table had been set up at the front with microphones for the panel speakers. Commissioner Richard Taylor sat in the center, his posture relaxed but professional. On one side sat Captain Morales and 2 other high-ranking officers. On the other side were 3 community representatives, including Loretta from the youth center. Diane spotted some familiar faces in the audience. Andre and Lisa sat with a group of teens from the center. Several of her fellow officers were scattered throughout the room, most in uniform. Her father hadn't shown up despite her invitation after their tense conversation the previous night. That discussion had ended with him hanging up, angry at what he called her betrayal of the badge. Richard Taylor stood and approached the microphone. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his deep voice carrying effortlessly through the space. "This forum is the first of many conversations we need to have as a community. The relationship between police and citizens, particularly citizens of color, has been broken for too long. I'm here as your new commissioner to listen, to acknowledge past wrongs, and to work together toward meaningful change." A murmur ran through the crowd. Diane noticed the skeptical looks on many faces. They'd heard promises before. "Before we begin," Richard continued, "I want to address an incident that many of you may have seen on social media. 2 weeks ago, I was physically assaulted by an officer while standing outside my new home in Oakwood Heights." The room tensed. Diane felt dozens of eyes turn toward her, and she fought the urge to shrink in her seat. "This incident was painful, both physically and emotionally," Richard said, unconsciously touching his shoulder where Diane's baton had struck him. "But it also presented an opportunity to address the biases that led to this confrontation, and the system that has allowed such incidents to continue for generations." He looked out over the audience, his eyes briefly meeting Diane's. "The officer involved has been disciplined, but more importantly, this incident has become a catalyst for departmental change. Tonight is about hearing your experiences and concerns. Tomorrow is about turning those concerns into concrete actions." The forum opened with statements from community members. People lined up at microphones placed throughout the room. They shared stories of harassment, of fear, of being treated as suspicious in their own neighborhoods. Some spoke angrily, others through tears. Diane listened to each one, forcing herself not to look away or make excuses. An elderly man described being pulled over 11 times in 1 year while driving his late model luxury car, a retirement gift to himself after 40 years as a school principal. A young mother told of officers drawing guns when responding to her call about a break-in, assuming she was the intruder in her own home. A teenager described being thrown against a wall and searched while walking home from a basketball game. The stories kept coming, each one echoing the teenagers' accounts from the youth center. This wasn't about a few bad experiences. It was a pattern Diane had been part of. Then a voice Diane recognized spoke from one of the microphones. It was Andre from the youth center. "I have a question for the police officers here," he said, his voice steady despite his obvious nervousness. "Do you ever think about how it feels to be us? To be watched all the time? To be treated like a criminal before you've done anything wrong? The officers on the panel gave careful, measured responses about training and community engagement. Andre listened politely, but his expression showed he'd heard these kinds of answers before. Before she could think better of it, Diane stood up. "I'd like to respond to that," she said. The room went completely still. Richard Taylor nodded, giving her permission to speak. Diane moved to the nearest microphone, her heart pounding. "My name is Officer Diane Reynolds. I'm the officer who assaulted Commissioner Taylor 2 weeks ago." A buzz of whispers spread through the crowd. "To answer your question, Andre, no. I never thought about how it felt to be watched, to be suspected, to be afraid of the people who are supposed to protect you. I never thought about it because I didn't have to." She took a deep breath. "I told myself I was just being vigilant, that I was protecting people, but the truth is I was operating on assumptions and biases that I didn't even recognize in myself. And those biases hurt people, including our new commissioner." The room was completely silent now, every eye on her. "I can't undo what I've done," Diane continued. "But I can tell you that I'm listening now. Really listening, and what I'm hearing," her voice caught, "what I'm hearing is breaking my heart." From the back of the room, a new voice called out. "Pretty words, but nothing changes. Cops protect their own." Diane recognized Officer Bradley, a veteran cop known for his harsh tactics. He stood with arms crossed, several other officers nodding beside him. "These community forums are just for show," Bradley continued. "Tomorrow we'll all go back to doing our jobs the way we always have." Richard Taylor started to respond, but Diane spoke first. "Is that really the job, Bradley? Harassing people because of how they look? Making them fear us instead of trust us? Because if that's the job, then maybe we need to rethink what we're doing." Bradley scoffed. "You're just saying whatever it takes to save your career." "My career?" Diane laughed without humor. "My career might be over, and maybe it should be if I can't do better than I've done, but this isn't about me anymore. It's about all these people who deserve better from us." She turned to face the audience. "I can't promise I'll never make another mistake. Changing how you think, how you see the world, doesn't happen overnight. But I can promise that I'm trying, and I believe others are too." She glanced at Richard Taylor, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. Officer Bradley and his supporters walked out, making their displeasure known with loud comments. But Diane noticed that most of the officers stayed, listening as the forum continued. Afterward, people lingered in small groups, conversations flowing more freely now that the formal portion had ended. Diane was surprised when several community members approached her, not to criticize but to talk. Their tone wasn't friendly exactly, but there was a cautious openness. "That took guts," Loretta said, appearing beside her, "standing up in front of everyone like that." "It was the least I could do," Diane replied. "No, the least you could do was nothing," Loretta corrected. "You chose to do something difficult instead." She nodded toward a group of teenagers from the center who were talking with some of the remaining officers. "You made an impression on them. They didn't expect any officer to admit being wrong." "I'm still figuring out how to be right," Diane admitted. Richard Taylor joined them, a cup of coffee in his hand. "Officer Reynolds, I'm glad you came tonight." "Thank you for not announcing my name when you mentioned the incident," Diane said. "Though everyone seems to know anyway." "People talk," Richard said with a slight smile. "But what matters is that you're part of the conversation now, not just being talked about." "Some of the officers aren't happy with me," Diane noted, glancing toward the door where Bradley had exited. "Change never pleases everyone," Richard replied. "But did you notice?" "Most of them stayed. They listened. That's a start." As the crowd thinned, Diane helped stack chairs and clean up. She was gathering her things to leave when Andre approached her. "That officer who walked out," he said. "There are a lot more like him, aren't there?" Diane considered sugarcoating her answer, then decided Andre deserved honesty. "Yes, quite a few." Andre nodded as if she'd confirmed something he already knew. "So what happens now? You go back to being a cop and everything stays the same?" "No," Diane said firmly. "I don't know exactly what happens next, but it won't be the same." "Can't be." She thought for a moment. "Would you and the other kids from the center be willing to talk to some officers? Help them understand what you've been teaching me?" Andre looked skeptical. "You think they'd listen?" "Some would," Diane said. "Maybe not all, but some. And sometimes that's how change starts, with just some. As Diane walked to her car, she spotted a familiar figure leaning against it, her father. His face was unreadable in the dim light of the parking lot. "You came," she said, surprised. "I stood in the back," he replied. "Heard what you said in there." Diane waited, unsure whether to expect anger or understanding. "Your mother would have been proud," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "She always said you'd be a better cop than me." "Dad," he held up a hand. "No, let me finish. I taught you to police the way I was taught. To see threats everywhere. To assume the worst." He looked away. "Maybe that was wrong. Maybe I've been wrong for a long time." Diane didn't know what to say. Her father had never admitted being wrong about anything related to policing. "I don't know if I can change," he continued, echoing her own words from earlier. 30 years of thinking a certain way. But seeing you in there, having the courage to speak up," he cleared his throat. "Well, it made me think maybe it's not too late to try." As they stood together in the quiet parking lot, Diane felt something shift inside her, a sense that the hardest part of her journey wasn't the public admission of her mistake or facing the community's anger. It was recognizing that change was possible, even when it seemed impossible. For herself, for her father, for the department, and maybe, just maybe, for the relationship between those who wore the badge and those they had sworn to serve and protect. 1 year later, Diane stood in front of the mirror adjusting her uniform. The weight of the badge felt different now, heavier with responsibility but somehow lighter on her conscience. Today marked exactly 1 year since the night she had confronted Commissioner Taylor outside his home. 1 year since everything changed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Loretta. "The kids are ready." "Don't be late," Diane smiled. The kids weren't really kids anymore. Andre was heading to college in the fall. Lisa had been accepted into a pre-law program. The Youth Leadership Council had grown, with new members joining every month. And today, they were presenting their police community training program to the entire department, a program that Diane had helped create. The training center was buzzing when Diane arrived. Officers filled the rows of seats, some looking interested, others skeptical. In the front row sat Commissioner Taylor and the department's top brass. Diane's father was there too, now retired but still involved as a community liaison, a role he'd created for himself after that night in the parking lot. Officer Reynolds, Richard greeted her warmly. "Today's a big day." "Yes, sir," Diane agreed. "I just hope everyone keeps an open mind." "They will," Richard said confidently. "Your work this past year has made an impression. Change is happening even if it's slower than we'd like." Diane took her seat as Loretta introduced the program. "What you're about to see is the result of a year-long collaboration between our Youth Leadership Council and members of your department, led by Officer Diane Reynolds. These young people have created a training module that will now be part of your required continuing education." The lights dimmed and a video began playing. On screen, Andre spoke directly to the camera. "Before you put on the badge each day, we want you to hear our stories. Not as statistics or case numbers, but as human beings." The video continued with testimonials from community members of all ages, interspersed with officers, including Diane, reflecting on their own biases and how they were working to overcome them. When the lights came back up, the teenagers took the stage. They'd practiced for weeks and it showed. They were poised, articulate, and passionate as they led the officers through exercises designed to reveal unconscious bias and build empathy. "Policing isn't just about enforcing laws," Lisa explained to the room. "It's about understanding the communities you serve. When you see me walking down the street, what assumptions do you make before I say a single word?" In the audience, Diane watched her fellow officers engage with the exercise. Some were uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Others leaned forward, genuinely interested. Officer Bradley, who had walked out of the community forum a year ago, sat with arms crossed, but he was still there, still listening. That counted for something. The final part of the training was a role reversal exercise. Officers were paired with youth members to work through scenarios from both perspectives. Diane partnered with a new member of the council, a quiet boy named Michael who reminded her of herself at that age. "In this scenario, you're walking home from school when a police car pulls up beside you," Diane explained. "How do you feel?" Michael thought for a moment. "Scared," he admitted, "even though I haven't done anything wrong." "Why scared?" Diane pressed gently. Because I don't know what's going to happen, Michael said. I don't know if the officer sees me as a person or as a problem. His words hung in the air between them. A year ago, Diane might have dismissed them as dramatic or untrue. Now she nodded in understanding. That's what we're trying to change, she told him, so that when you see one of us, you feel protected, not threatened. After the training concluded, officers mingled with the youth council members. There were difficult conversations happening in every corner of the room. Honest questions, challenging answers. Not perfect, but real. Diane felt a sense of pride as she watched. This was just one day, one training. But it was a start. Commissioner Taylor approached her, coffee cup in hand. "Walk with me," he suggested. They stepped outside into the bright afternoon sun. For a few minutes they walked in comfortable silence. "I've been following your work this past year," Richard finally said. "The youth outreach program. The changes you've advocated for in patrol procedures. The way you've stood up to resistance within the department. Just trying to do better, sir," Diane replied. "You've done more than try," Richard said. "You've actually done it. And that's rare." They stopped by a bench overlooking the training center's small garden. Richard sat, gesturing for Diane to join him. "I'm creating a new position," he said. "Community Relations and Officer Training Director. The person in this role will be responsible for expanding what you've started, making sure every officer in the department receives ongoing training in bias recognition and community engagement." Diane nodded. "Sounds important." "It is," Richard agreed. "And I'd like you to take the job." Diane stared at him in surprise. "Me? But I'm the one who made a terrible mistake," Richard finished for her. "Yes. And then spent a year doing the hard work of making amends and creating real change." He smiled slightly. "Who better to lead this initiative than someone who understands exactly why it's needed?" Before Diane could respond, they were interrupted by Officer Bradley approaching with quick, determined steps. "Commissioner Reynolds." He nodded to each of them, his expression unreadable. "Got a minute?" Richard and Diane exchanged a glance. "Of course," Richard said. Bradley seemed to struggle with his words. "That training in there, with the kids." He gestured vaguely toward the building. "It wasn't what I expected." "How so?" Diane asked carefully. "I thought it would be the usual sensitivity garbage. People telling us we're all bad cops." Bradley looked away, but it wasn't like that. "Those kids? They weren't attacking us. They just wanted us to see them. Really see them." Diane nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "Anyway," Bradley continued awkwardly, "I've been thinking about what you said at that forum last year, about whether what we're doing is really the job. And maybe I've been doing it wrong." He straightened his shoulders as if the admission physically pained him. "I've got 20 years on the force. Too old to change completely, but I'm willing to try to do better." He looked directly at Diane. "If you're still running those community meetings, I'd like to come to the next one." Diane felt a surge of emotion she couldn't quite name. Thursday, 6 o'clock. The youth center in Oak Park. Bradley nodded once, then walked away. "Well," Richard said when they were alone again, "miracles do happen." "Small steps," Diane corrected. "That's all we can ask for." So, Richard brought the conversation back to his offer. "The director position. What do you think?" Diane considered it. A year ago she'd been suspended, her career in jeopardy, her self-image shattered. Now she was being offered a chance to shape the department's future. "I'd be honored," she said, "but I have one condition." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "I want to keep working directly with the youth council, and I want them involved in developing the training, not just as subjects or examples, but as partners." "Done," Richard agreed without hesitation. "Anything else?" Diane thought about everything that had happened since that night. The painful conversations, the resistance, the slow process of opening her eyes to realities she had never wanted to see. She thought about Andre and Lisa and the other youth council members who had challenged her, educated her, and ultimately accepted her efforts to change. She thought about her father, who was finding his own path toward understanding in his retirement years. "Yes," she said finally, "I want us to be honest about how far we still have to go. This past year has been important, but it's just the beginning. We can't pretend we've solved everything." Richard nodded solemnly. "I wouldn't have it any other way." He extended his hand. "Director Reynolds." As they shook hands, Diane felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about her redemption or her career. It was about creating a system where what had happened between them that night would become increasingly rare, and eventually, unthinkable. Inside the training center, the youth council members were gathering their materials, laughing and talking with the officers who had lingered to continue the conversations. Loretta caught Diane's eye through the window and gave her a thumbs up. "You know," Richard said, following her gaze, "when I first moved to Oakwood Heights, I never imagined anything good could come from being profiled in my own neighborhood. Again. And I never imagined assaulting my boss would lead to the most meaningful work of my life." Diane replied with a small smile. Richard laughed. "Life takes unexpected turns. The question is what we do with them." As they walked back toward the building, Diane spotted Michael sitting alone, reviewing his notes from the session. "Excuse me a moment," she said to Richard. She approached the boy, who looked up with a shy smile. "You did great today," she told him. "Thanks," he said. "Do you really think things can change? Like for real?" Diane considered the question seriously. "I think change is already happening. It's slow and it's hard, and some days it feels impossible. But yes, I believe it's real." She gestured toward the officers still engaged in conversation with the other teens. "A year ago, this wouldn't have happened. A year from now, who knows how much further we'll be." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe by the time I'm grown up, I won't have to feel scared when I see a police car." "That's the goal," Diane said. "And I promise you we're working on it. Every day." As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the training room floor, Diane knew that this moment, this conversation, this promise was what real police work should be about. Not control or power or fear, but protection, service, and trust. It had taken her 8 years and one terrible mistake to understand that truth. Now she had the rest of her career to live it.